What's up? You're listening to The Long Game, and I'm your host, David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this episode, we chat with David Fallarme. David is a fractional CMO and marketing consultant for scaling startups who are in between marketing leaders. He's built and led marketing teams at companies big and small, from public companies like HubSpot and Electronic Arts to venture-backed startups like On Deck, Referral Candy, and App Annie. In this conversation, we talk about his experience doing marketing for various types of companies, from startups to enterprise companies, from B2C to B2B. He embraces being a generalist and even actively avoids specialization, and that's a big discussion point for us in this conversation. He shares some of the things he's identified in B2B marketing that are implicit assumptions that marketers need to unlearn to break out of the boringness of B2B marketing. And through his experience advising startups, he's found one key thing that all startups seem to struggle with. He calls it randomitis, and he shares frameworks for how to drive more focus. He also shares a framework for how to choose the right game in life. That one was a really interesting one for me personally and my own decision making. If you're a startup founder, you'll find this really helpful. Here's my conversation with David. David, welcome to The Long Game.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making time. So before we jump into marketing, you've had a wide range of experiences in your career, which we're going to get into, but give our listeners kind of a highlight reel of how you got to where you are today.
So the way I think about my career is very different from how most marketers that I've met think about their career. Like everybody's kind of like, I'm going to get into this industry, junior, senior, manager, director, VP, CMO. That's kind of the path that most people want to take. Where pretty early on, I knew I didn't want to do that. And there's a bunch of reasons why, but which we can get into. But I just didn't want to do that. And so I pursued what I personally call like the bingo card style of career. So instead of a ladder where you just keep going up and up and up, I made a lot of lateral moves, changed industries, changed company size, because I actively did not want to specialize. And the reason for that is I just am really curious about marketing and how it works, how things work at different companies, different dynamics. And so if you look at my LinkedIn, it kind of doesn't make any sense, and recruiters hate it whenever people talk to me about that, because it's, B2B, B2C, big company, small company, public, seed, stage, startup, then jumping up around and like making lateral moves. It doesn't make any sense. But so in terms of career highlight reel, my personal highlight is the fact that I've been able to jump around in different companies and kind of have impact regardless of the stage or regardless of the size or the type of product. Because I think marketing can really just be boiled down to a set of principles and then apply that to wherever you're at. So whether that's a video game company, so I used to work in a video game company called Electronic Arts, and we were doing Facebook social games. Like we launched a game that did 3 million DAU in like a month, or less than a month. What? It was like a few weeks. Yeah, it was insane. It was just insane times. This is like 2011, 2012, and that whole thing was gangbusters.
The gold rush, yeah.
Yep. And then after that, I joined a startup that was stuck at 6 figures ARR for a very long time, and then like unlocked the growth flywheel. So then by the time I left, it was like 7+ figures and beyond. So in terms of highlight reel, it's for me, I'm less excited about, I grew this company 500% than being the Bear Grylls of marketing, where it's like, you can drop me anywhere and I'm going to figure the shit out and then I'm going to make it grow. So a kind of a lateral answer to your question, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah. Why is it that you decided so vehemently to not specialize? Because I think we're about the same age, and I remember a lot of folks were saying like, you got to find your specialty, like you got to find the thing to specialize in and become the top 1% at. But I kind of went against that too, though I did feel the guilt of not specializing. It sounds like you were like, no, I don't want to specialize.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
I think part of it is because there could be an immigrant thing in there. So born in the Philippines, grew up in Canada. And so part of it was this, I was always kind of counter to the normal programming. So I could see things from the outside. So I didn't feel like I had to buy in, and I could have the choice to opt into whatever lifestyle path I wanted. The other thing is a weird quirk about being Canadian in the time that I was growing up there is our high school was 5 years for some just strange reason. And then
your cohort that was
it was just the weirdest thing. It's so unlucky. And then my just college,
an experiment,
it was just the strangest thing. And the year after us was 4 years, and so that was weird. Then my university program was 5 years. So kind of right off the bat, I'm behind in a way. And then I took some time to teach English in Korea and then like explore Asia. So I took a personal gap year and just to explore. So by the time I'm really getting started in my career, even if I wanted to play the latter game, I'm like behind 3 or 4 years behind most people. But it's not like I was disappointed that was the case. In fact, if anything, I was happy that path was cut off, that I couldn't play that game, because it gave me the freedom to explore like what I really want to do versus what society is telling me I should be doing and the job title I should be having, what salary I should be having. So that freed me up to just explore curiosity. And what I found was my core value is like mastery, learning, and that gave me the freedom to pursue those things. And so that's just something that's happened over and over. Like, for example, when I left HubSpot, I was head of marketing of Asia. And then I got a couple of offers to be like CMO of some company, VP of marketing of some company. And then if you're playing the latter game, like, oh yeah, of course, I want to do that. Chase, post that LinkedIn post that says, oh, I'm VP marketing, CMO, haha, I'm the best. And then have that on my profile, feel really good about it. But then I joined a company where I was a director. So it doesn't make any sense to do that. But if my core value, if I wanted to stay true to that, was mastery and learning, it was a very obvious choice for me to do that. And so by not playing into the job title status game, I've been able to pursue much more interesting opportunities and like express myself through the core values that I want to pursue.
Interesting. So it sounds like you're saying if you were to take those VP or CMO roles, you wouldn't have had the space to learn as much as you did by taking a director role. Is that correct?
Good question. So in those companies, the learning opportunity from my estimation was not as much as if I took the director role. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would have been taking it for the status and possibly salary, but I was more attracted to the opportunity space and the problem space and the people at the director company. And so without that baggage, I was like, okay, this is obvious to me. Let's just do it. Go do it.
And is it because those VP and CMO roles, like you wouldn't have actually been in the weeds or like in the fields getting like rolling up your sleeves because you'd have a team and so you wouldn't get to learn as much? And then a director role, you're like actually in the trenches with your team. Is that kind of the distinction there? That's
part of it. But the bigger point was the space was, I was just more drawn to the director company. And so I chose to do something more personally interesting and where I would potentially have a higher quantum of learning than if I took the VP CMO role and like played that game.
Oh, okay. So it's sort of like the company's offering you those more substantial titles they wouldn't have been as interesting for you.
Yes.
So, okay, got it. And so, okay, you mentioned at HubSpot you were head of marketing for Asia, and Asia's really big. I don't know how many countries there are, but it sounds strange to be like, hey, you do marketing to this entire continent of multiple cultures, languages, behaviors. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it was pretty hard. Pretty
sounds
hard.
Bonkers, man.
Yes.
Like, how do you market to like Vietnam versus India? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the first thing to realize when anybody's expanding into Asia or APAC is to realize it's not really a thing. Like APAC is not a thing. There's no such thing as APAC. There's no such thing as Southeast Asia, because in that grouping, depending on which definition you use, that grouping could include Japan and India and Australia, which are just completely different countries, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to think of them as a region from a spreadsheet planning, like yearly sales ops planning exercise. But really, you have to split them up into micro regions and almost build a go-to-market from scratch for all of those. And so the core thing that we learned and the mistakes that we made was around lack of prioritization. So when you say Asia, you shouldn't just think, okay, Asia is a thing. You got to break that down. So what is a tier 1 market for us? What's a tier 2, tier 3? And then allocate appropriately. That being said, it's a slog. And I don't think a lot of companies have figured this out, especially B2B companies who expand globally, where they think, oh yeah, we figured out North America, we figured out Europe, and that feels good. We need more growth for our next earnings report or for our next, funding round. Let's go to Asia because population is there and, we see a bunch of good stuff. It's way, 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 way harder than it looks. And I have yet to see a company really crack it, at least ones that are starting from a North America or Europe base.
Yeah. So I want to dig more into the whole like APAC marketing thing, but you mentioned like B2B companies just now, and there's that weird jump in your resume where it's like I know you hate this distinction and you can share more about that, but you went from B2C to B2B. You're one of the few marketers, if not the only I know, who did that. So tell us about that switch and Why do you hate it when people bring that up like that?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to do the switch just because. So I came from the gaming company, and then I wanted to go to enterprise SaaS. Yes, completely just around the corner.
So exciting.
Yeah. Well, and it's like so different. I don't think I was doing mass gaming B2C. Then I joined an enterprise SaaS B2B. Like nothing about those two things is conceptually the same. But I wanted to do that because it was different. You know, I could have kept going in B2C and kept doing that and kept getting promoted, bigger companies, bigger title. But again, core value being mastery, learning. I want to see as much of the bingo card as I can, as much of the chessboard as I can, unlock the unknown parts of the map. So that's why I did something so strange and drastic. But yeah, so to your point of why I don't like the distinction of B2B or B2C, because I think there's mental coding there that people need to unlearn. I mean, it's fine to use those things, but just be aware of what you are mentally coding when you say those. Because B2C usually means FMCG, like shampoo in a grocery store. That's what people really mean when they say B2C most of the time. And B2B is like Oracle, big trade shows, outbound sales.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But that's not always the case, right? B2C can also be like selling insurance, which, if you think about it, is a content marketing play a lot of the times. Right? They do a lot of SEO. They do a lot of inbound sales. So, leave an inquiry on the website, which kind of looks like a B2B go-to-market for most B2B SaaS companies. You find like top 10 insurance companies. You go to the website, you do some research, you compare pricing, you type in a chatbot, somebody reaches out to you. That's an SDR flow, right?
Yeah.
And so the trap that people fall into there is, I'm only going to hire from my industry. I'm only going to hire people who have done my thing. But what really you should be doing is, who has done the go-to-market that I'm executing? And therefore, I should remove this blinder of B2B, B2C, and you end up with better talent that way. You find you can recruit people that normally nobody else is talking to. And so your talent pool is much bigger, and then you get better ideation that way too when you kind of think of new campaigns.
Yeah, I wonder if that mental coding you're referring to is why people think B2B marketing is so boring. Like, they just have this idea of what it should look like, and that's what they keep doing. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. And I think there's some companies who are doing a good job of breaking down that barrier. I think Shopify is one of those, just because their product is like B2C essentially. But when they do B2B, I think if they do it a little better than most companies. So yes, it is boring a lot because we just hire from the same people who run ebook plays, who, read the same blogs and listen to the same podcast. And so it's no surprising if all the inputs are the same. Don't be surprised if the outputs are the same.
Yeah. And so going back to the APAC marketing thing, you became known as like the APAC marketing guy, or at least that's how I thought of you when you first started at HubSpot and I stalked you. So just a little background on you for the listeners. You've worked in Seoul, Korea, Toronto, Canada. I think that's where United Way is. Beijing, China, Singapore, and I'm sure I've missed a lot of cities. And now you're in New York.
Yep.
So tell us about how you became that APAC marketing guy.
Well, part of it is because I was working at HubSpot and it kind of needed that a little bit for my job to understand how to do marketing in APAC. And so it just started off as me hosting a bunch of meetups. And then I realized that it was more efficient if I do it in a Slack community. So I built a Slack community for APAC marketing people. And I think that's how a lot of people started to get to know me in their region. There's also no it's a white space. There's no APAC marketing influencers, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't even doing anything remarkable. I was just there. And so it's like I was first place, but there was only one person in the game kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that's a big reason why some people associate me with being the APAC marketing guy, at least in a previous life. But it's because there's nobody else doing it, and it was part of my job as a HubSpot representative in the region.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it was sort of your hack for learning what other people were doing and potentially recruiting too.
Yeah, and that's like such a big underexplored way to hack your career and to hack learning. Just get to know other people or be the conduit. I should rephrase that. Be the node that people connect through, and then because then once they connect to each other, they'll think of you, and then your reputation grows that way, as opposed to a lot of people who are trying to just build a personal brand on their own. So there's something there, I think, that also accelerated my reputation in that way. Is because I was connecting people, I was hosting meetups, I was introducing people to each other, typically APAC is so fragmented, as we talked about. And so when an India marketer was looking for a Singapore marketer, I would connect them, and just going forward that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Now that you say it out loud, I don't know many other well-known like growth or marketing experts. Yeah. I mean, there's someone that's part of the Reforge network that was at Gojek, but I think her name's Crystal.
Crystal, yeah.
But yeah, the fact that I had trouble remembering her name is another issue, but like there aren't that many. One, it's a very westernized industry, I think. At least the people that we pay attention to, like probably easy to name a couple American B2B experts.
Yeah.
But when you think about it from like other ethnicities, other geographies, it's tough for me to even.
There's two reasons for that.
I feel uncomfortable about that.
No, dude, there's two reasons for that. One is that APAC is so fragmented. And so even Crystal, right? She was the VP of growth, or she was in the leadership role at Gojek, which some people may not know is or was like the Uber of Indonesia. So that's a pretty idiosyncratic market that not a lot of people will care about. And the reason she's really talented, and like if you listen to her podcast, it's super sharp. But it has to be that level of company where it's so big, and then you have to be that visible and be willing to be on a podcast and build a personal brand that you can gain some reputation. And the other is, I haven't found another way to explain this, but just like Asians are more shy, like Asians are more shy. And so typically it's like the ones who were educated abroad that came back or are living in Asia that are doing more of this stuff. So part of it is just the fragmentation of the region. So things in Indonesia are just not going to be as interesting to you as DoorDash case study. Like a Gojek case study is just less interesting globally than a DoorDash Groupon case study. And the other is just, it's a cultural thing. People are not encouraged to be wild and crazy in their youth. And so that plays out when it comes time to putting yourself out there. But I think it is slowly changing.
Yeah, maybe it is. I mean, when I think back 5 or 10 years ago, podcasts, I don't think there are many like Asians doing podcasts. Now, like we're sitting here in 2023 and it's you and me, like Filipino and a Cambodian on a podcast about marketing. So times are changing.
There's a lot. If you really look really closely, we're getting the Asian band. We're getting out there. We're doing more and more stuff. We've infiltrated.
Yeah. So all right. So after HubSpot, you were at On Deck, and that company like really blew up. I think in a good way, like, or at least from where I sit, it seems in a good way. It grew really fast, and I guess maybe there was a downside after that. But you got to see that company go from 100 to 300 employees in like 6 months.
Yep.
How big was it when you left, and like what was it like going through that whole growth phase?
Yeah, so I was there for the growth phase, but also the opposite of growth phase. So there were a few rifts, layoffs, and I was caught up in the second one. So by the time I left, it was less than half of that. The exact number escapes me, but it was basically like Clubhouse, perfect for COVID, but then just played over a longer time scale. Like really, really well optimized for everybody being indoors, wanting to build community and wanting to make sure that they're still furthering their careers. But then as stuff started opening up and the VC bubble started to burst, those are just two headwinds that were too strong to overcome.
Yeah.
It's still around. It's still doing great. Still in touch with everybody. So still rooting for them. But a much smaller footprint than definitely when I was there.
And when you were there, were you working directly with the startups, or were you doing like the marketing to get more startups applying?
Yeah, I was on the marketing side. So building the brand awareness, making sure that our social posts were going as far and wide as they could.
Yeah. Is that a husky next to you?
It's a Shiba.
Oh. trying to say something into the mic.
Yep. It's like, I have something to say about On Deck too.
All right, so I want to talk about startups since we were talking about On Deck. I know right now you're advising startups, and you're currently an interim, is it VP of marketing at a company right now? Yep. So tell us about what you're advising startups on, like what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm the guy that you turn to when you're between marketing leaders. So either you have just fired your head of marketing, or you are considering firing your head of marketing. But you as the founder, or you as the exec, like have no idea how marketing should look or what it's supposed to look like. So I'm the person who comes in, plugs that gap, and makes sure that it's rational and it's properly invested. Can you see him?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see him. I have no. He's fine. He's fine. I'm fine. Totally normal.
Okay.
I have a puppy of my own, so I know what's up. Oh, that was him, by the way.
Yeah. When my dog does that, it's like he wants to go out or something.
Yeah.
Do you need a timeout or?
We'll see. I think this is the first time I'm doing a call in his place, so he's probably just like, "Who are you talking to? Why is it not me?"
Okay, it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what sort of, how are you currently advising those companies? Like what advice do you find yourself giving frequently?
So a big part of it is reducing randomness. So the situation I find myself in and why founders are either considering firing their head of marketing or have just fired their head of marketing is because there's too many things going on and there's no way to understand what's actually materially important to the business. So the situation normally is we're a B2B company, we're doing blogs, we're doing sales, we're doing ads, we're doing events, we're doing influencer stuff, we're thinking about launching a podcast, and it's all kind of the same level of priority. And that's because nobody has a thesis for how things are supposed to work or what is appropriate to the company.
Wait, these are startups. How do they have so many resources to do all these things?
I know. Well, they're funded. So they're usually Series A, Series B. So they got some momentum going on. They got to some level. They have some traction. But now that marketing is the bottleneck to get to the next funding round, they have to take it more seriously. And so in the absence of a strategy, of a thesis, it's like, let's just do more of what's happening. Because what got us from 0 to 1 is just executing violently and doing a bunch of stuff. So they carry the same mental model to 1 to 10. And it starts to fall apart.
So it sounds like you're saying they're like, hey, let's just do all of the things. And there isn't really a reason to believe any of them would work. Like, why do you think they just go and try to do everything? Are they being advised to do that like by someone else?
Because they don't have a mental model or a framework for how to think about marketing and a go-to-market strategy. So roughly like 0 to 1, think of that as product market fit. Like, do we have something the people actually want? 1 to 10, from what I've seen, is like go-to-market fit, which is like, what is the actual right way, sustainable way that we can get customers, acquire them, and keep them, right? And so the product market fit stage is a lot of hustling. It's a lot of doing stuff. So your mental model is like, let's launch a product hunt. Let's tell these people. Let's do this stuff. Let's launch this thing, right? Let's launch this campaign. And then like, let's not even track anything because we're just so busy trying to get to traction and get the next round, right? But then once you do 1 to 10, it's like you have to be a bit more systematic and have a bit of approach and prioritization. And so that muscle typically isn't there, or they just don't know how to do things. There's no constraints to do anything. There's no reason to say no to anything. And so in the absence of all that, you're just going to keep doing stuff.
So how does a startup make that transition from 0 to 1, do everything, throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, to that 1 to 10 like sort of scaling phase?
Yes.
What does that look like?
I think it's roughly a lack of constraints. That's what what's the core problem is, right? And so the main thing, there's a series of constraints that I walk through. It's like the first thing you got to ask yourself is the business model. There's a bunch of constraints built into your business model. Are you selling a $10 a month product, $100, $1,000, $10,000? Just along that spectrum changes the type of marketing that would make sense for you. So for example, one of the most common things, B2B SaaS startups, they're going to do outbound sales just as default because they feel like they have to do SDR outreach, right? But their product is like $10 a month. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, but they have reps or they've hired an SDR agency.
Is that a real example?
Yes. Yeah. Just again, because your muscle as a founder or as a team 0 to 1 is like, let's just do stuff. Let's do things that don't scale, right? Everybody will share the Paul Graham thing. Do things that don't scale. Okay, B2B SaaS doesn't necessarily scale because it's human heavy. But then 1 to 10, it doesn't make any sense because you actually need to start scaling things now. That advice breaks past a certain point.
Yeah. So you've mentioned constraints a couple times. Like, what are some examples of how, I guess, in this stage, it might be the CEO who's unhappy with a marketing leader. Like, what sort of constraints could they put on to help drive focus? Or what can the marketing leader do?
So business model is the first one. So of the companies we can compare ourselves to, are we closest to like a Salesforce? Are we closest to like a HubSpot? Or are we like a Canva? So those are 3 different price points. You can think of it as roughly like $1,000 a year, $10,000 a year, $100,000 a year. Then they kind of have already solved the problem for you of what your go-to-market should look like. on those three things. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, just model what's already worked for a company that's achieved scale, right? So a big part of it is business model. Then the other is go to market. So are you like high touch, low touch, and no touch? Kind of along that. Is that my dog or your dog?
That's my dog.
That's my I can't tell.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you could hear it.
Business model constraint, go to market constraint. Then like you start to think about your ICP, which is something that a lot of marketing leaders strangely don't think enough about. Like, what is the buying behavior? What's the information done?
Wait. Marketers aren't thinking about ICP enough?
Yeah, because they're just focused on executing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say more about ICP then. It comes up in my conversations all the time, so I'm surprised to hear that the folks you're talking to.
Yeah, because a lot of the times at startups, if you're a founder who has a product background or you're just not a marketer, you're going to think, oh, I need a social media person. I need an SEO person. Like, that's the thing. And so you hire an SEO person. And so it's that problem of if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So they're just like, SEO is a thing. We're going to keep hammering on SEO. And I had this problem too. Like I joined a seed stage company and my brain was wired towards content marketing. And I only knew how to solve content marketing problems using a content marketing toolbox without thinking whether the ICP even cared about the content marketing as a channel, right? Maybe the way to reach the customer is through outbound sales. And in that case, like top 10 ways to do this, like it's just not going to resonate. So ICP constraints are one of the main constraints you need to think about. So business model, then go to market, then ICP constraints. What's the information diet? What's the buying behavior? And then mapping your activities using those as the constraints, as opposed to thinking channel first. You got to think ICP first.
Yeah, that's a really helpful framework. So right now it's a bit theoretical. Could you give an example, and maybe it's an anonymized client or something?
Yeah.
Like, what's an example of how you've used that framework to set those constraints and figure out a more focused go-to-market?
I'll give you from my own experience because I've lived this, right? So a Referral Candy was a like Shopify MarTech platform. And so when I joined, again, it was stuck at 6 figures for a long time, maybe even just like high 5 figures, but it was stuck for a long time. And so when I joined, we were doing an outbound sales experiment, which I was like, yeah, we should do this. This makes sense. And so the guy was getting Reebok in the pipeline. He was getting P&G in the pipeline. So he was getting some good logos in there, but they would never close, or just like the funnel wouldn't make any sense. And we were like, what's going on here? Like, we are putting a human on the problem and it should resolve itself because we have so much attention on it. But it just wasn't going to work out if you do the math on it, because our product was like under 5K a year, and outbound sales only really works like 15K and up. And so in that case, we're like, oh, the business model doesn't support this, and the go-to-market doesn't support this, because even if we have a salesperson and he or she is super, super good, the ICP doesn't want to buy from a salesperson. Like, they just want to self-serve. They want to do it on their own. Yeah. So that's what I mean by like ICP constraints. Like, how does the buyer behavior manifest itself? Do they want to talk to a salesperson? Do they want to self-serve? And so those things have to match. So once we figured that out, we're like, okay, business model, 5K a year, go to market, it's going to be like no touch to medium touch. So maybe some people are going to have some problem that they want implementation help. Then ICP constraint. Where do they spend time? What's the information diet? Well, we know that Shopify store owners, because we sell a Shopify plugin, they read a lot of blogs, they go to a lot of communities, they listen to a lot of webinars because they're trying to learn how to do all this stuff. And the persona we were targeting was earlier in their journey. So those people trying to go from, let's say, $1,000 a month in sales to $10K a month in sales, as opposed to people who are much bigger and bigger retail companies. And that constrained our focus even more. And after that, I can keep going. You look like you have a question.
Yeah. I mean, one thing on that, so there's a couple things there that I want to call out. Like, so Referral Candy's ACV was like $5,000 a year. You were getting Reebok or those types of companies in the pipeline, but that's like, I guess what you would call enterprise. And when you think about the enterprise buying cycle, it can't just be like the referral marketing manager that goes and tries to buy a software touch list. Like, they probably have to go through procurement, talk to IT, like make sure there's like security posture and all that. So
exactly,
there's no way they could have gotten to that account.
Yep.
And so there's like many different reasons why that wouldn't work. It wasn't just like, it wasn't just like, touchless is more economically feasible. It's that those companies will never buy from a company like that.
Yep. So that's what I mean by the ICP constraint. So I can say that people don't do that because I did it. And I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who has this problem or thinks in this way. But thankfully I learned that lesson pretty early on.
Yeah. You had another example. What were you going to talk about?
There's more constraints.
What are the constraints?
So there's business model, go to market, ICP, then at that point, that should reduce a lot of the randomness of what you would try. You would not. So in our case, we should not be doing like big events. It just doesn't match our business model, right? Now you get to the point where it's like team and context related. So what are your goals? The goals also provide constraint. Do we need to grow 1% a month, 10%, 100% a month? And so the goals imposed on you either by the VC model or whether just like the leadership has a certain way they want to grow the company, that imposes certain constraints, because when you have to grow 10% a month versus 100% a month, the tactics are going to be completely different and your approach is going to be totally different, right? So goal is a constraint. Then like time and budget is a constraint. Like maybe you have all these things, but you actually have no money. And so that provides a further constraint. And so that, again, reduces the randomness, take things off the table. And, are you on a PIP? In that case, you need to show value immediately as opposed to investing in this like really long SEO play as an example. You need to do paid ads. Then the last constraint is people. So what skills do we have in the team? Because maybe you have all of those boxes checked off, and maybe you decide that paid social and influencer marketing is your thing, but you don't have anybody in the team who can run this thing. So then, like, how do you think about that?
You need a growth hacker, Dave. You need a growth hacker is what you need.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's one way to solve it, but then you just have to make sure that the person can actually be a generalist enough that they can solve a lot of these things, right? Which is, again, good at the 0 to 1, but 1 to 10 starts to get a bit dicey, because then you don't want to be running too many experiments, because you want to constrain your experiments to a certain set of channels, which reveal themselves if you run yourself through those constraints.
Yeah. I can share one that has come up a lot just by nature of the agency. So we have a lot of folks coming to us saying they want to do SEO and like content marketing, and I'm like, well, who's your ICP? And they say, well, we're targeting Fortune 500, or like we have a targeted list of 2,000 companies, which is great that they have that list, but I'm like, yeah, if you're selling to the COO of 2,000 companies, content marketing is not going to be like SEO is not going to be how you reach them. Like content is going to be a helpful part of it, but SEO, you're going to get so many unqualified leads. Like it's going to be great to see lead numbers, but you're probably not going to convert that to pipeline. Yep. So that's been coming up in a lot of my conversations, and I'm not sure how often it comes up for you since you're advising
all the time.
Stage, but maybe
all the time. I think it's because people who want to work with me, they see HubSpot in my background. They're like, oh yes, we want to do what HubSpot did, and maybe you guys see the same thing, right? But then it's like it's not even relevant for you. Like what HubSpot did is not your business model. You're an app. Why are you talking to me about topic clusters? Like you should be investing in paid social and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Literally, HubSpot sells to anyone and everyone who can breathe. All right. So, anything else you want to add to what you're doing to advise startups? I mean, is there one thing you wish you could tell every startup that doesn't get a chance to work with you?
What I have, there's two people I'm really talking to whenever I think about that question. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, there's always like two people I'm always talking to. One is founders, and the other is like heads of marketing, because I don't want them to get fired. I don't want anybody to get fired, even though it is in my interest as a potential pipeline for my client base, because I've been there, so I'd rather not have that happen. And so the thing is, think about who has already succeeded using the playbook that you were sorry, let me rephrase that. Think about your business model and look at who already has succeeded, and just model what they're doing. Just copy what they're doing, as opposed to, oh, we should try this, we should do that. So at least if you're not going to use the constraints model that I mentioned, you can always look to people who are ahead of you, who are on the same path. Think about what they're doing and work backwards to see how that applies to you, as opposed to taking in ideas from left, right, and center.
Got it. That's great. And so maybe an additional constraint that I just thought of, because it's kind of just a big talking point right now, is marketing during a downturn, or like when you're expecting a recession with all these layoffs happening. How does that change the way that you advise some of these companies? Does it stay the same, or are there certain things that you typically recommend they start with to kind of validate the value of some of these?
Yeah, well, this is a good one because it's context specific. Some companies are thriving. So some of the companies I'm working with, like, we don't feel any problems. Like, we're totally fine. Because they were well positioned through their funding or through the way they set up their team, or they're working on something in AI, and so there's a lot of organic interest that way. But that goes down into the time and goals constraints, right? So if one of the goals in a company is preserve burn, or preserve runway and lower burn, that factors into what you could invest in. And if one of the time constraints is we have 6 months of runway, figure this shit out now, then that tells you something else, right? So it's factored into all those things.
Yeah. So I want to get into, right now you're advising startups, and I'm curious for you, why after, well, one, I want to ask about the layoff. Like, how did you feel afterward? But like, why did you decide to go into consulting instead of going back in-house?
Yes.
Because that's a pretty big decision.
Yeah, I mean, one of the core values that I mentioned is like mastery and learning and just like getting better at it, right? And I feel like this way I get way more reps. So I can talk to 5 companies at once. I see 5 different MarTech setups at once. I talk to 5 different teams. And so that just gives me like this multiverse, like Doctor Strange in the time loop exercise, as opposed to going very deep in one company, which is fine and gives you a different set of things. But I just did that a bunch of times, right? So I enjoy it because I feel like I'm getting better as a marketer because my pattern matching is geometrically getting better. This is happening over here. Oh, just do this problem. Solve this problem over here. This is the way you would do this. Yeah. And then I'm exposed to more networks. So I think that's enjoyable. And I would actually advise more people to at least try this or look into it. I wish I started earlier. In a weird, twisted way, I wish I got laid off faster, because then I would be forced to do this, / I would be trying this sooner, because it's something I've always thought about. And so in that sense, it was a natural next step for me. And so let's see how it goes. I'm enjoying it a lot, and pipeline is healthy, thankfully. But if anybody wants to work with me, of course, I'm not going to turn you away and not take up a conversation. But so far, so good. And let's see how it goes. Again, my natural awesome. North Star is just mastery and learning, and whatever path is going to allow me to do that is what I'll pursue.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe bouncing back from getting laid off wasn't that difficult for you. I
think I went through like the 5 stages like everybody else does.
Yeah.
But then one of my core principles as well is always focus on what you can control. So what's within my sphere of influence, and the market is outside of my sphere of influence. What's within my control, and just focus on that, and that allows me to process things in a much more productive way.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit more about that process? I mean, I'm sure there are folks listening who may have gotten laid off, unfortunately, but like, what was I don't know if there was a process, or maybe it was just like questions you asked yourself to work through figuring out what the next step was, or what things were in your control.
I do something that is kind of nerdy, but I run like QBRs on myself. I do like weekly stand-ups with myself. Asian Davids Unite.
What'd you do yesterday? What are you going to do today?
Yeah, it's a big one, because then that allows me to get like a zoom out naturally into the way I think about stuff, like get perspective. I found that previous to me introducing these processes, I felt like I was a bit less anchored. And by having, I actually have again, super nerdy, happy to dig into it, but I have a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual process for like retrospectives, obviously varying lengths. But that just allows me to really stay in touch with myself and understand what I'm feeling and process things a lot quicker. Because a lot of the times when you're feeling anxious, you just need to like say it out loud. You just need to label it and think about, okay, what's in my what's in my control? What can I do as a result? I'm not saying you should not be emotional and emotions are not valid, but you should acknowledge them as quickly as you can. That way you can process them and get to a more productive frame of mind.
Yeah. Tell us more about the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual review that you do. Yeah,
so it sounds weird, right? But everybody's doing this for work already. So I'm saying just take the processes that are working in your job and then apply them to yourself. Just think of yourself as a company, or think of yourself as a product. One of the most useful framings that I learned early on is like, you are the CEO of you. So if you are a CEO and you're viewing yourself as like a company, you probably would do a bunch of things differently. You would allocate your time differently. You would start to think about what trade-offs you'd be making. You would start to think about, oh, this is not really good and this is low value work. I would delegate that. I think it's a Ray Dalio thing. It's like system 1. Think of yourself as 2 U's. And so you always have to have that system where there's a person who's executing and a person who's managing the person who's executing. So separating that allows you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So principles was huge. It's probably where I'm pulling it from. But the daily, weekly, monthly thing is a daily stand-up, which is kind of just like, hey, what happened yesterday? What am I blocked on? What should I be doing today? What are the things to avoid? What are my meetings? And just kind of being proactive and staying ahead of that. The weekly is a retrospective, but also kind of like sprint planning for the next week, which is like, hey, what went well? What didn't go well? What didn't I expect? What did I scope incorrectly? What do I need to make sure I'm estimating properly the next time around? The monthly is kind of like an MBR. So it's like, okay, what were my targets? I don't have like a spreadsheet for everything that I'm doing, but I at least know what I'm trying to achieve with the time that I have. Then the quarterly is like a QBR, which is like, okay, what were the big rocks I was trying to move in the last quarter, and how did I progress against those? What did I learn? What was my OKR score like? And then the annual is just again kind of a macro retrospective / look forward to how I want to be spending my time. There's also a 3 to 5 year process, but I'm going to skip that because it's
what does this look like tactically? Which maybe it goes into what you're saying. Like, are you just journaling? Do you have a tool? Do you have a Notion set up?
You know that mid-twit meme, which is like notes and then like Rome Research Slack. Yeah, so I've gone through that. It's all just in Apple Notes. It used to be this crazy setup with like zaps and like spreadsheets were automated. Yeah, it was crazy. So now it's just Apple Notes. There's just a weekly thing in there. There's weekly questions I ask myself. What made me happy this week? What am I going to do next week? What am I feeling that I'm not acknowledging? So just getting at like emotional check-in, a mental check-in, but also like a work projects check-in. And I also think about, okay, how are the people around me doing? That way I've developed some empathy and some self-awareness as well of how I'm relating to the people who matter to me. So all of those just keep me centered. And you know, when something like a layoff comes, you have all this infrastructure that allows you to process it quickly and something to fall back on. So you have some structure and you have infrastructure for making sure that you don't totally just lose yourself and start binging Netflix with no end in sight and like eating junk food. So it just allows you to make sure that there's always something to fall back on.
I love that. And I asked about this because I have something very similar. I also went through that mid-wit whatever meme where I had let's just say I had multiple databases in Notion hooked up to each other. Like that's all I'm going to say because I think anyone who uses Notion gets how complex that can get. And I was like, wait, I don't even fucking use this. All I use is this one like checklist and like a monthly review. And even the monthly reviews I've stopped doing. But every day, like when I'm in bed, I have a checklist where I'm like, did I work out today? Did I do any form of meditation? Did I journal? Did I read? Have I invested in any relationships? Did I write? Did I meet someone new? And it's highly unlikely I check all of those, but it's a daily reminder like, hey, you should be like investing in your relationships. Don't focus on work too much. Like, hey, you haven't worked out in 3 days. Like trying to get that streak back up. And then I do like an annual review, and that's like a 3-year look forward, rolling 3-year planning.
Nerdy Asian Davids, man.
I love to geek out about this shit, man. I think it's helped a lot in my life, but I know
we need a Slack community of nerdy Asian Davids.
I have a feeling that'd be a large group.
Yeah, one of every Asian ethnicity.
So I know one of the things that's been on your mind a lot is like becoming a first-time manager, and maybe we can talk a little bit about like career development here. Like, was HubSpot the first time you started managing a team, or okay? So yeah, tell us more about like that process of becoming a manager and how you learned and
I think I was
the lack thereof of resources.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? So there's so much content online around how to be like a good director, how to be a good VP, talk to the CMO. So these are all content that is good for leadership, for marketing leadership. But I have
leaders.
Yeah, you're already a leader and you're trying to become more influential as a leader. I haven't seen a lot of content for people who just became a manager for the first time, which I think is a shame, because if you want to have like a healthy company, it's actually like the middle management layer is one of the most important layers in your company, because that's most of your company, but nobody really is focusing on this group of people. So that's part of what I try to do in my LinkedIn posts and wherever I have like a platform, just because nobody's speaking to these people. Like they're all trying to read these VP, director, CMO stuff, and it doesn't make any sense. And you're kind of like feeling frustrated because, okay, that's great to know how you should be investing in brand versus demand, but I just like am on the social media team and I can't influence any of that, So it is a shame because most of us learn our management through implicit modeling of who we got. And if you just got unlucky and you got a shitty manager, then you're kind of screwed, because then you internalize all these habits and behaviors that you don't know are bad, and you pass that on to the next generation. It just gets worse and worse and worse. So yeah, it's a shame. It's something that I try to focus on in anytime I get a public platform. And the main thing that I speak about there is, the main lesson for me at least, is realizing that 80% of marketing is not marketing. It's like stakeholder management. It's comms. It's making sure your team has high standards. It's making sure you are organized. Like, because if you have all those things, that allows you to unlock the other 20% of marketing, which is, all the tactical stuff that we talk about on LinkedIn as marketing. All the best practices that you see are just that 20%. But most of your job is not that. It is making sure that you give a good presentation to your leadership team. It's making sure you know how to run a good meeting. It's making sure you know how to write a memo, how to keep people accountable. Like, nobody talks about this stuff because they either think it's boring or it's not really marketing. But especially marketing, you're mostly in an influence position. So if you're not good at this stuff, then you're going to fail at the 20%, which you think is your whole job.
Yeah. So how does one learn those things? Like, do you have resources or recommendations for folks?
I wouldn't say there's a specific something. I think it's more of a mindset shift, right? So here's the problem that I had, and I continually see it again and again in either the clients that I have or people who reach out to me. Marketers only know how to talk to other marketers. Like, we only follow marketers, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy to me. Like, one of the things that I find funny is whenever I'm on LinkedIn and I'm scrolling through, it's just marketers commenting on other marketers' posts. And I'm like, this is just one giant echo chamber, and it goes to your earlier point or the early discussion around B2B being boring, because it's all just the same people shuffling companies doing different things, right? So one mindset shift I would have, if anybody is listening to this and wants and recognizes this, is like, don't only listen to marketers, follow designers, follow product marketers, follow engineers. Some of the most interesting marketing learnings that I've had are from following PMs, because a lot of it is similar. Essentially, every job is just resource allocation. Like, that is really every job, like from finance to marketing to product management to engineering. It's like, how do you resource allocate in the smartest possible way for your context, and using marketing as an expression for your decision to resource allocate. So I think you got to be a business person first who sees the big picture, and then use marketing as a way to express what you've learned from your business insights.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I've heard it said out loud before, but yeah, a lot of when I look at my LinkedIn, probably because of like the career I'm in, but lots of marketers talking about marketing to other marketers, and it's kind of an echo chamber. And then when you question anything, people are like, oh, why would you say that? Or it's a lot of disagreement, but I'm like, there's a reason the sales team doesn't trust the marketing team. Like, that doesn't just come out of nowhere for no reason. It's
well-deserved. It's a totally well-deserved reputation, and people don't get it. One of the things that triggers me the most is when I see, don't work for a CEO that doesn't get marketing. It's like the worst, the worst. Whenever I see that, I want to throw my laptop out the window, because it's like victim mentality. It's like, oh, woe is me. The CEO doesn't get it. It's like, oh, if only the CEO got it, then I'd be successful. On the other hand, it's like, have you educated the CEO on how to do these things?
Yeah.
Have you created the mental model that the CEO can buy into that would make sense for your company? So this, again, 80% of your job is not marketing. It's like educating internally, influencing internally. And if you don't realize that, you're going to be perpetually frustrated. And if you ever find yourself in a place where you're ranting and complaining about everybody else except the stuff that you can own, then you're probably in a bad spot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things that come to mind for me is I remember at HubSpot, there came a point when my role was really building pitch decks, like presentations. And I was really annoyed before, but then I saw the power of like presentations as a tool for communication. And when I became a product manager, that was pretty much my role. I was pitching my projects to VPs like all across the company, and like was able to get buy-in. But I don't think people see the value of communication as much. I don't think they'll see it until they have to get through it. Like the politicking and all that stuff, which feels like a dirty word, but it's like, it's building relationships and getting buy-in and convincing people sometimes that your thing is worth investing in. Like that's all part of communication, but it feels like people kind of, it's easier to fall into the safety net of like being heads down and doing your work versus trying to communicate, going through the effort of communicating to people who might misunderstand you, which is part of the job.
It doesn't feel like work, but that is, again, in my view, 80% of your job. So you're just being negligent if you don't get good at it. And like the further up the stack you go, like the VPs that we were working with, they're not like writing blog posts. They're not thinking about what topic clusters. They're hiring people to do that. And so how do you hire people? Well, you influence them. You make a good pitch, or you're good at, let's say, presenting to the board to unlock resources. So all of it is communication. All of it becomes sales at some point. And again, one of the things that people don't buy into is that is most of your job, especially the more senior you go. it's going to be more and more, how well do you do context switching? How well do you sell your ideas? How well can you get resources allocated to you? And how well can you make the right call when it comes to business strategy?
Yeah. I gotta say, this conversation is kind of frustrating me because like we had a tough client that I supported one of my strategists with, and after the call, he was like, "Hey, how did you manage that call so calmly and like know what to say?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you were able to address a lot of his frustrations, but he didn't get defensive." And I'm like, "Oh, no one's taught you like stakeholder management or managing up or executive communications." And I realized like I have no clue where to point you to learn these things. And so I just started writing a memo of like, here's my framework for how I think about communication. Like, what is it? Why is it important? What are we going to do about it? Like, if you're getting too deep in the weeds, that's too much. And it was really helpful. Like I heard they were able to implement a lot of this stuff, but I'm feeling a little frustrated now where I'm like, oh, that doesn't exist. Maybe it's something that you can create.
Yeah. Nerdy Asian Davids.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're coming up close to time, but there's one last thing I wanted to ask you about before we get to our closing questions. You had mentioned this idea of playing the right game in life. Say more about that.
Did we talk about this? Oh, yeah. Right. Okay. So here's a framework that is not really marketing related, but I have shared this with a lot of people who are, let's call it like plus or minus 30, and layoffs or not, they find themselves at some kind of crossroads where it's like, okay, I know I'm not going to be homeless. So how do I direct my life? And I don't know what path to take. So I was lucky early on that I discovered the mastery thing. But I realized that I'm playing the mastery game. That's not the only way to win at life. There's many games you could play, and all of them are valid, but you have to pick the right one, right? So I think there's 6 games you could play in life. First is the mastery game. I'll start with that just because I've described it already. And that's essentially, you don't care if you get rich or famous. You don't care if anybody sees what you're doing. You just genuinely care about learning and mastering your craft, whether that's marketing, whether that is basket weaving, whether that is like judo. Like you just really care about this one thing and the rest doesn't matter. So that's the mastery game. The other is like the money game, which is you just want to rack up as many points in life as you can. The money is just a scoreboard to you. You actually don't care about being rich. You just like the fact that you're number one on the scoreboard. You're getting all these points and you're getting validation for your skill. Nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. I think it's a default game that most societies force you to play. So if you're not like a doctor or a lawyer, you're viewed, or a banker or whatever, you're not a billionaire, you're a loser. Because the default game society makes us play is the money game. So mastery, money. Then there's the altruism game, which is kind of like, I want to build schools in a developing country. I think I should be like somebody like Mother Teresa who helps as many people as she can. And that's the way you have impact in life. Again, no value judgment. That's not better or worse than the others. It's just a game you can play. There's the security game, which is, the way to win at life is to be home at 5 p.m. and have the same group of friends from high school, work on my deck, go to the tailgate on Sundays. And that's cool. That's all I want. I want to be close to my family, kind of just have a stable life, and don't want to think about AI disruption. Just want to think about like the same thing.
Sounds like a nice life.
Be around my family. Yeah, right now, right? Again, but not better or worse. That's just one of the many games you could play. So we have mastery, money, altruism, security. Then there's the autonomy game, which is like, I want to optimize for maximum optionality, maximum agency in my life. So you see this with Bitcoin maximalists. You see this with digital nomads in Bangkok who don't want to be tied down to anything. They have multiple properties all over the world, something like that. Multi-local. The person I know who I think embodies this the most, he's a Bitcoin maximalist, and his dream is to have like a houseboat, or live on a boat. It just goes around the world. He's not in any country. So that's, you probably are, he's the far end of that continuum, but you could imagine people earlier on. So typically these are entrepreneurs or people who just want to do their own thing. Then last is the influence game, which is, I feel almost a moral need to to change as much behavior and lives in the world as I possibly can. So typically this is politicians, authors, things like that. And so the way I think you have a unhappy, unsatisfying life is, first, you don't realize there are games to play and you just opt into the money game. And you're like, oh, I'm really unhappy. I don't know why, but you feel like you have to play that. So the first unlock is to realize there's many games to play. But the second trap to fall into is to try to win all of them. So next thing you know, you're 40 or 50, and it's like, oh man, I haven't made as much progress in my career. I feel like I have to give to my community, but I want to spend time with my kids. But I feel like I need to build a personal brand. So you just become really stressed out because you're trying to go really, you're an inch deep in all these things when you really should be a mile deep. And so I think the way to win is pick which game is important to you. I think you can blend two at most. Other than that, you're getting into diffusing your focus too much. So you pick the two that are most identifying with you and think about how you can express yourself in those ways. For me personally, it's mastery and influence. And so all of my choices are obvious once you realize those two things. This is why I'm so active on LinkedIn, why I go on podcasts, why I do all this stuff. But mastery, and that's why I ended up being a fractional CMO, fractional VP person, is because I want to get as many reps as I can, see as many different problems as I can. And that way I can live those two values that are so important to me.
Dude, I love that framework. I've thought about the whole idea of here's what I'm focused on and here's why, but I didn't think to label all the different games that could be played. That's super helpful. Now I can actually identify which ones I'm blending. For me, it's probably the mastery and the money with some of the influence there, like a tinge of that. That's great. Did you come up with that?
Yeah. So when it
sounds very well thought out.
Yeah. It's probably one of the most common pieces of advice I give to people. Because for whatever reason, people ask me for a lot of career advice, possibly because I feel like I'm outside of the system and like my resume doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And yet I'm doing okay. You give off
a sage vibe. You're a wise sage.
But it ties back a lot of stuff we've been talking about, right? I view myself as two different people. One is the person managing the system. So I have the distance from the day-to-day stuff. I have this daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual thing, which allows me to zoom out. But also, I have been fortunate to recognize that there's multiple games you can play. And so once you realize I have to pick one or two, I can ignore the rest. It doesn't make you a bad person if you're picking the money game, because there's no value judgment in any of these. It's just which one is best suited innately for you. Where do you think you can add value to society? Or where do you get personal satisfaction? And just if it's a game, then you can structure yourself so that you are set up to win that game. Is he okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think he might be throwing up.
Oh no.
Is there also a status game? Is it 7?
It depends. I think it blend. You have to make that more precise, because you might find when you decompose that, it's actually money or it's actually influence.
Yeah.
Because it's status within your peers, and maybe you want to be the most altruistic, so you got to make that a bit more precise, and I think you end up... I've challenged it a lot. I can't think of any more...
That's a good point.
Yeah, I can't think of any more than 6.
Well done. I'm going to have to write that down for so I can use that as a reference for folks.
The thing that's useful as well, I know we're over time, but just to bring it back to the career stuff, if you're a manager, especially a first-time manager, you can use this to try to read your team. Like innately, when you think about the people you know the most, you can actually know what games they're playing, even if they haven't told you. Like this person is obviously playing the money game, or this person is unhappy because they're stuck playing the stability game because of their community where they are, but they actually want to play the autonomy game. So because they want to experience more things. So you can identify what your team is, what games your team wants to play, and then you speak to them in that way, or you help them structure their career so that they are playing those games. And so it's useful as a management tool as well, in addition to being a personal career development tool.
That's perfect, because we're coming up on our first time doing performance reviews for our team. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. You got 5 minutes for some closing questions?
Questions for you?
No. I got some closing questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course.
I mean, if you got questions for me, I'm down. All right,
tell me about your Notion setup. Tell me about your Rome research.
Dude. Oh, I don't use Rome. I decided not to.
Okay, you're an Obsidian fanboy. Okay.
I don't use that either. They're too complicated. All right, man. Let's close this out. So, what's one opinion you got about business that you think people would disagree with?
Oh man, we have so many that we just covered. You shouldn't be obsessed. I just posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday. You should not be obsessed about hiring A players.
Oh.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
Because you should be focused on building a system that turns people into A players. Yeah. I've seen this firsthand in a bunch of different ways. Like you get a bunch of really smart people together, but you give them a shitty system. They're all going to fail and they're all going to be miserable. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you get a bunch of B players, but you put them in a really good system, and by system I mean, run through all those constraints that I mentioned. So you have a good strategy, you have a right focus. they're going to outperform the A-player team any day of the week.
Dude, that's great. All right, what's one impactful piece of advice you've been given?
In terms of anything?
Could be life, could be business.
Okay. I would say I had a boss who was he's an engineer's engineer. And you probably picked up some of the things that I've said because I learned it from him. So I was always coming to him with like, hey, we should do this. Or I think this idea is something we should pursue. We should invest in this. His follow-up question is always, can you make that more precise? Like, what do you actually mean? So I think that has always stayed with me. Whenever somebody says something to me, it's like, okay, what do you actually mean when you say that? I want to be rich. Okay, how much money and by what time frame? Or I want to work in this industry. Okay, specifically, what type of company, what company size, what kind of team do you want to work for? And I think taking a lot of the things that we say, the aspirations that we have and the goals that we have and making them more precise, really precise as you can. Like, what do you mean and what does this mean in terms of time frame or input or who's involved, really allows you to be a lot more effective in a lot of the things you try to do for yourself.
That's great. The benefits of having an engineer as a manager. What is one book you'd recommend more people read?
There's two. One, I would say Ray Dalio Principles. That one, it was very annoying to read for me because I would read it, it would blow my mind, I'd put it down, and I'm like, oh, why haven't I thought this in so long? And I'd like make notes. It took me like half a year to get through it because I kept having to reevaluate my life with every chapter.
Same.
That's a big one. The second one is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Calanthe.
Yep.
You have that one? And that one I think is good because it's for me, it's always useful to be reminded of my mortality because it brings everything into focus. Like, why do I get up in the morning? Why am I doing anything here? I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have achieved some level of privilege in your life that you don't have to worry about being on the street. And so how do you just make sure that you're not just dragging the spreadsheet for the rest of your life? For me, it's useful to be reminded I am mortal and I'm not here forever. So what do I want to do with this time? If I want to just like hang around and spend my days with leisure, that's totally fine. Just make it a conscious choice.
Yeah. I love that. It's a good reminder, like, hey, am I doing something that I actually enjoy right now that's worthwhile for me? Like, forget what anyone else cares about. Like, what's important to me? Yeah. All right. So where can people find you on the internet?
LinkedIn. Just look me up on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm most active right now, and that's where I'm posting all the stuff that we talked about. So reducing randomness in your work and your life and helping you become a better first-time manager. Those are two things I'm passionate about.
Yeah, nothing about APAC Roundtable or themarketingstudent.com.
I got to think about those.
Staying focused.
No. I got to think about what to do with those.
I love it. All right, man. It was great having you on the show. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's good to meet another nerdy Asian David. And I hope to meet the other like 30 or 50. If you're out there listening in podcast land, hit us up. We'll get our Slack community together.
Dope.